Before we get into the show, a quick reminder to check out and subscribe to the Beer Edge podcast with Andy Crouch. Each week, he's doing deep dives into breweries, talking with journalists covering the beer space, and unpacking a lot of what makes the beer industry so interesting. Find the Beer Edge podcast wherever you download shows. Welcome to Drink Beer, Think Beer, the podcast that gets to the bottom of every pint. I'm John Hall, and let's talk about craft malting this week. My guest is Caleb Michalke, and he's the owner, maltster, and farmer of Sugar Creek Malt Company in Indiana. From corn to heirloom grains and the struggle of the modern American small farmer, we're going to get into it all. But first, an invitation to check out beeredge.com for articles, to sign up for the newsletter, and for our merch page that has the very best in Defend Pilsner and Camp Rauchbier drinkware and wearables. And if you want to help keep us on the air, you can reach out to Liz Milby. She's at liz@beeredge.com to learn about advertising. And speaking of that, this episode is brought to you by Breeze, the leading supplier of specialty malt to craft brewers. They offer the broadest product line in the industry, including a wide range of roasted malts that add flavor, color, and character to beer. Their experienced operators handcraft every batch of roasted malt to ensure the product you get is consistent. Check out brewingwithbreeze.com for beer recipes using roasted malt. And by Dragon's Milk White from New Holland Brewing Company. It reimagines what a stout can be. Your vessel will be filled with the color of gold, and yet there's more to this white stout than meets the eye. Aged in bourbon barrels, Dragon's Milk White is smooth and velvety, abounding with notes of coffee, chocolate, and vanilla to present classic stout flavors in a delicious new way, all in a sessionable 6% ABV package. Find Dragon's Milk White near you at dragonsmilk.com. And finally, you can rub and sniff New Zealand hops like Nectaron, Rawaka, Nelson Sauvin, and Motueka this week at the Craft Brewers Conference in Denver. The North American team for New Zealand Hops LLC will host CBC participants at its booth, Brew Expo America, number 1743. And there, you'll be able to smell fragrant hops and oils, learn from the best in the business as they host live brewmaster Q&As, a book signing, musical happy hours, and giveaways. Learn more at facebook.com/New Zealand Hops. Corn gets beat up in beer circles, and that's thanks to years of it being maligned by craft brewers who saw it as an adjunct ingredient that didn't bring a lot to the conversation, or thinking that it messed with purity. But corn is dynamic, it's flavorful, impactful in a beer recipe, and it should be celebrated. And that's why in Indiana, a state known for corn production, there are rows and rows of corn being grown annually by Caleb Michalke. He's the owner, maltster, and farmer of Sugar Creek Malt Company. The farm comes up in my conversations quite a bit these days because small breweries are into what Caleb is doing. And after you listen to this, you're going to hear why. And yes, Rauchbier fans, we're going to be talking about smoked beer, but there's more to it than just that. It's historical and forward thinking. It's the worry of a farmer and that undefinable urge to push forward anyway. From talking about malt that hasn't been grown since World War II and is now destined for lagers, to his own brewery and how malt is okay being the bass player in the beer band, never actually getting the spotlight in beer. Caleb is drawing the cartography of the roadmap of his business as he drives it. Here's our conversation. What is it like being a small farmer in America these days?
It's not easy. Not easy at all. So my dad, I actually had no desire to come back to the farm really in high school, and even mainly through college. My dad raised hogs and corns and soybeans, just regular conventional farming basically in Indiana. And I'd had no real draw to come back to that family farm. Through college.
Was that by his encouragement?
Yes. Yeah, they never really pushed me to really come back at all. It wasn't something they wanted me to, a lifestyle they wanted me to get into. I think, on the front, now whether they wanted me to deep down, but they just didn't want to push me into it, that could have been, but on the front, it was never a push. So yeah, they raised corn and soybeans and hogs, and I never really wanted to spend my life in hog barns. And so I went to college to actually become, work in developmental agriculture. So going into third world countries and starting up, breeding programs in Peru and, whatever it is. That's what I wanted to do. I tried to do that for a few months out of college and realized I would have had to, basically volunteer, like join the Peace Corps for a few years. And, I was dating my now current wife, and realized that if I did that, we probably wouldn't have made it through that. So I made a decision to kind of stop chasing that dream and do something different. Ended up teaching agriculture at a high school for 2 years, and got really into home brewing and in the brewing industry during those 2 years. And started researching, what went into beer and, where it came from. That kind of led me to hops and malt. And I looked into hops and really didn't think it didn't have the draw for me. Malt, we were already grain farming. We had a combine, we had grain bins. And malt was more than just farming. It was taking it was farming and then taking that grain and making from one single kernel, thousands and thousands of different flavor combinations. And so the art and the science and the experimentation that goes into malting really kind of drew me in. It has kept, for the last 6 years now, has kept my brain very interested every single day. We're always doing something new. And I didn't really think that I could do that as much with hops. So I came back to the farm and said, "Hey, Dad, I know I've never really wanted to come back to the farm, but I do miss that lifestyle. And if I ever want to start a family, I want my kids to be, to know the lifestyle of farming and know the hard work that goes into it. And be able to, even if I'm working, day in, day out, still be able to have my kids around and things like that." So in 2014, we traveled around the country and went to a few different craft malt houses. Really, there weren't that many around at that point. Riverbend and Valley Malt were really the two main ones that we went to.
Yeah.
And I went to North Dakota to try to learn how to grow barley, because nobody in Indiana was growing barley at that point, and still nobody is, unless they're growing it for us. And so I went, I could go to Purdue, which is our local ag school. They couldn't tell me a single thing about barley at all and what varieties to grow or anything like that. So, and then went up to Canada and took a 2-week-long course on malting, which of course I learned everything I needed to know in those 2 weeks.
Well, sure.
And then my wife and I and my parents, we started a malt house in spring of 2015. So it's really been a good way for me to come back to the farm and do some, even though it's not really technically farming what I'm doing, but my dad now grows barley and wheat and rye, and then these heirloom corns that we're doing, regular corn, regular yellow duck corn that we sell to distillers. And then we also have started, a seed company that he's doing now. He's actually was able to get out of hogs in the last 2 years, completely, because he's, getting up in age. And he's really just been doing the grain side for himself and for the malt house. So it's been a good way to diversify the farm, because really there just wasn't enough. We weren't going to be making enough money for me to come back to the farm the way it was. I had to bring something new to the farm. And so that was the malt house. That was a very long answer for your question, but sorry. So
no, but I want to bring it back to that original question, because you said it's not easy. And I think that there's this, I don't know, maybe it's me being on the coast, and, it's this idea of, American grit and American perseverance of, farms being critically important, and they are. But it is also, you said it's not easy. And when I do talk to farmers, which again is not all that much, but it's enough, the same refrain is, this is harder than it's ever been. It's harder to make money. It's harder to keep things going. There's 1,000 things to be worried about today, and then 1,000 different things to be worried about tomorrow. I mean, from your perspective now, for 6 years in, with the malt house, has it gotten any easier? Has it gotten harder? Is it
for farming in general?
Yeah.
No, it's definitely, I mean, in the last 6 years, I can think of off the top of my head, just in my, little county that I'm in, 4-5 different family farms that have gotten out of farming in the last, since I started the malt house, that have been generational farmers that they just weren't, either making enough money or the next generation never really came back to the farm, which would have been, me. But I did end up coming back to the farm. So it's not easy. And the reason that my dad got out of the hogs is the last few years, he's basically just been breaking even. He's been working day in, day out, and basically just to break even. And that's a lot of the times what farming is. If you break even, that's great. You have to be really really large, and have thousands and thousands of acres, which is what's happening now with all the smaller family farms kind of going out. There's a few family farms in our county that have been buying up the other, and they're still family farms, so they're not big corporations or anything like that. They're still family farm, but it is kind of getting down to a smaller amount of families that are in the county farming. So either you do that, either you get a lot of acreage, or you get other businesses going on. There's I don't know any farmers around here that don't have another side business going on, and they're not just farming. So the one down the road for me has a butcher in town. Okay. Another one has they actually got completely out of row crop farming. They started years ago doing a Christmas tree farm and Airbnbs and pumpkin patch. And so now they're more agritourism. They totally got out of farming. They're agritourism now. My cousin who used to raise cattle and a lot of row crops, they still do row crops, but they've got a couple other side businesses like metal siding. They sell metal siding and things like that. So no, it's not as simple, picturesque that you think of. Go out and feed the 1 or 2 cows that you got and go back in. And that's not how it is. It's a, like you said, perseverance and grit and determination to keep that lifestyle and keep that for your family. I always hear the phrase farmers live poor and die rich. We have so many assets tied up in acreage and equipment and things like that we're always paying on those throughout our entire life. And then, by the time we actually get all that paid off, then it's time to pass it on to the next generation. So
can you talk about, though, the importance of small family farms? Because so much of, and let's take beer out of the equation for a second, but people don't buy, bespoke cars, or computers, or a lot of the other things that we have in our daily lives. There's, 4 or 5 major companies. And certainly when it comes to, food production now, there's a lot of consolidation, that's out there. And that hurts me because, living in New Jersey, where we actually still do have farms, and we used to have a much more robust farming tradition, both dairy farms and crops. The loss of that, even in the last 40 years, has been felt. But from your perspective, what happens when small farms decide to close? Like, what does that mean societally? What does that mean, for us who aren't in it day to day? What does that mean as consumers?
So to be devil's advocate on this, because I taught agriculture in high school, and I grew up in a commercial farm. I grew up in, it was a family farm, but we raised hogs indoors and things like that. What I do, I feel like is this niche thing. And I love organic products and things like that, but I do think we need both. I graduated college wanting to do developmental agriculture and going into third world countries and things. Yeah. And I think that the very highly automated and very low cost foods are necessary for certain areas and for certain families with different income levels. Mm-hmm. I don't think we can always have these high end produce and things like that are, organic or heirloom and things like that. I think.
No, I balk at spending $10 on a tomato that was sung to every night or whatever. Like, yeah,
right. I mean, I love to buy that, but we can't sustain our world doing that. So I think that it is, I think that we and it's the same thing in the brewing industry. I think we need both. I think we need craft beer and I think we need macro beer. I think they both serve their purposes. And I think the same thing with farming. I think that there always needs to be a very low cost way to feed people. But I also think that once we get into that point, then we start losing the diversity in different grains and in different livestock, different breeds of livestock that might not grow as quickly and might not produce as much meat. Same thing with different grains. If we're only looking for the cheapest and most effective way to feed people, then we're losing flavor and we're losing diversity. And so I think this movement that the whole country really and the whole world is in, and going back and doing craft things and doing small agriculture is great, and I think it should happen. But I think it needs to be balanced out. I think our whole food production needs to be balanced out in general.
Where do consumers start to get involved in that conversation?
I think by their dollar.
How can they?
I mean, I think by their dollar. Everybody likes to talk that they support local and say, and talk about it a lot. But, when we're going to the grocery store, how often are we actually buying stuff that is locally grown? I am bad at that myself. We live in a very rural area and there really aren't that many opportunities to buy things. We have Kroger and Walmart in town and that's really about it. So, we go and buy most. We don't have like a really great farmers market set up, every day and things like that. So, I'm just as much to blame as everybody else. But I think in general, we've got to start putting our money where our mouth is and start buying those products.
You talked about flavor diversity before. And being where you are in Indiana, I mean, it's closer to Michigan than it is the south side of the state. And Michigan has sort of emerged as a hop producing state in the last couple of years. I know Bell's tried with Malt for a while, and I think they sold that farm a couple of years ago. And you had even mentioned thinking about hops early on. But when it comes to flavor and diversity, was there something that drew you to malt over hops?
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah. Like I said, hops is just farming. I feel like you go out and you harvest the hop, and that's the flavor that you harvested is what you get. With malting, I can take, one harvest and literally make it into thousands of different flavors. And so that ability to experiment and to play and to push the limits of what we think of malt being really is what drew me in. I mean, that's the only way I've been able to keep my brain happy, and keep me emotionally and physically happy the last 6 years is just by always trying to think of what's new and what's and what we can push and what we can come up with. So, we started out with base malts in 2015, just to really try to figure out how to malt because, I had 2 weeks practice in a classroom. That was it. So
more than enough. Yeah.
Yeah. More than enough. Right. It wasn't like,
right. Senioritis kicked in on day 7. And so like really the last 3 days were a coast. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And it was a lot like brewing was in the 80s, early 80s and early 90s, in that we had to build all of our own equipment. We couldn't go out and buy malting machines. Those didn't exist back then. And they still, they exist, but they still aren't very economical. Most new malt houses are still building their own malting machines. So yeah, it was a lot of just trying to figure things out those first couple of years. And the same thing with the agriculture. We didn't know what varieties to even grow here. We started growing North American varieties in Indiana that were bred originally for Canada and Montana, and they just didn't grow here at all. They just didn't produce very good malt, or barley that then wouldn't produce very good malt. So we ended up finding, or some companies came over from Europe and brought some European varieties over, and that just drastically changed the malt quality that we were able to produce. So that was huge, number one. So that helped, getting German winter varieties that we could grow here, just drastically improved what we could do. And then once we kind of figured out the base malts, I really wanted to keep pushing the limits. So we built a cold smoker that we now produce the most amount of smoked. We have the largest list of cold smoked malts you could ever want. So I've got 40 or 50 different woods, herbs, spices, barrels, all kinds of things you can smoke with, and then you choose what wood you want or herb you want, and then you choose what malt you want smoked.
And you're doing this. You're doing this to order.
To order, correct? Yep.
That's so if you want fun. Yeah.
If you want a persimmon wood smoked rye malt, we can do that. If you want a lavender smoked Pilsner malt, we can do that. Whatever it is, we'll cold smoke that. So we started that in 2016. So a year after we started malting. Then 2018 came along, and we hand built our roaster that we put in a trailer that we can actually take to festivals and roast on site. So we've done that quite a few times. We'll take the roaster to a beer fest or to some event and roast on site, and then leave it there at the brewery, and then they can make a beer with it. Like it's our little jab at the hop industry, doing a 24-hour malted grain. So.
It's a fresh Rauch is really what it is that you're saying. Yeah. Wet Rauch doesn't actually kind of work, but fresh Rauch I think actually kind of works. Yeah.
So that was the smoker. So in that that was the roaster. I said smoker, that was the roaster. So we do all kinds of crystal malts in that, chocolate malts. We've done in that caramel corn, chocolate rice. All kinds of weird things out of there. So we started that in 2000.
Does it show in the final beer though?
Oh yeah, definitely. I had some people make we did a chocolate corn and caramel corn cream ale with Cloudwater up in Michigan. I think that's the name. Cloudwater. Yeah. And that cream ale turned out awesome. It was this dark corn cream ale. It was pretty neat. They come through in certain ways, and we've malted Carolina Gold rice here before, and I've had quite a few pilsners or lagers made with that is just so light and refreshing. Our caramel rye, I will say is the best.
Oh wait, is it Stormcloud Brewing?
Stormcloud, yes. I'm sorry.
Okay. Cloudwater's in the UK. That just sort of threw me for a second. Yeah.
Yep, I'm sorry. Stormcloud. Thank you.
Okay.
We do a crystal rye that is the best crystal malt on the market, hands down. Like, it is so good. I just sit there and eat it. It just melts in your mouth. And things like that. So we started that. Then I got bored again. So in 2019.
How do you get bored with Rauchbier?
Well, we were doing that, but it was just cold smoked Rauchbier, and it wasn't really doing it in the traditional way, and so I wanted to do it in the traditional way. So in 2019, we built the Suinhus. I went over to Norway and visited a few different places there that have been doing it, for generations and generations, and we were able to actually produce a couple batches there while we were there with them, and then we came back and built our own Norwegian smokehouse, and so we've been doing that for 2 seasons now, and in the winters we do this traditional smoked malts, and in the summers we actually make wind malt and just dry it out in the sun and the wind. So yeah, I once I get kind of one thing pretty nailed down, then I get bored and want to do something different. So we keep pushing the limits on what we're doing.
Is there a new frontier on smoke beers and smoke malt that you're sort of itching to tap into? If you're doing cold smoke and now traditional Scandinavian, is there the
traditional Scandinavian is, I don't know if you've had any of the beers made with that style of malt or not, but it is intense. it's too much for some people. It's a very, very smoky, in your face smoked malt. So it's definitely not for everybody. But I really wanted to produce something that was historically accurate, whether it's, perceived well in the market as of right now or not. But I do, as we were talking before this, I do think that smoke beer is coming back into somewhat of a style, or somewhat of a fashion. I think people are starting to enjoy those flavors a little more. So, as people start getting into that more and becoming more accustomed to that smoke, we'll see how that develops into even a more smokier beer, like the Norwegian beers that I've had and that we make. they're smoky.
I mean, I joke about the This Week in Rauchbier page, just because it's so delightful to see how many people are into smoke beers. It's almost 1,000 that are in this Facebook group at this point, and it's growing every day, which is a lot of fun. But you're making this, and you're trying to put it out to people who want to buy it, and then make a product with it. Do you still get resistance from brewers, or are the people who are seeking out the smoke malt that you're making, are they just seeking you out because they know it's good and they already have an idea in mind?
Resistance as in, what do you mean by that, I guess?
I don't know. Are there people who are like, hey, it's nice that you have that on your catalog, but I'm never going to buy that?
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah. I mean,
who are these people that I should be writing angry letters to?
I mean, so many people. Like my smoke, the Sign House malts, the Soy House, the smoke malts that are coming out of there are really being shipped all over the country, because not every brewery is going to make, a smoked beer. We live in, I live in Indiana, and I realize that, some of the beer here is or a lot of the beer here is not, not pushing the limits as far as the styles go and stuff. And so it just gets shipped. I've shipped it all over the country, those smoke malts. But yeah, no, there's definitely like people they'll say, oh yeah, this is really cool that you're doing that. But exactly, like, maybe we'll do
I'm not going to buy that. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe we'll do a beer with it every once in a while, but that's about it. So yeah, no, it's definitely a very unique malt, and we produce very unique malts. I mean, even like, last year we started doing, bourbon barrel aged chocolate malt, which is a very expensive malt because we have to buy bourbon barrels and actually age the chocolate malt in it. But it does produce.
So wait, walk me through that process. Is this, so you're getting bourbon barrels, and then we're getting freshly dumped. Yeah,
we're getting freshly dumped bourbon barrels from the distillers that we work with, from West Fork Whiskey, based out of Indianapolis.
Sure.
We are then putting some of our base malt in there to absorb that whiskey, then roast it, and then put it back into the barrel and let it sit for a couple months and let it just nice and pick up all those oaky vanilla flavor.
Are you rotating the barrels? How does that? It's not just sitting in there.
Yeah, we'll roll them. Yeah, every couple of days we roll them just to kind of rotate the grain around. But yeah, that initial absorption, we get the grain kind of wet with the whiskey almost, because there's still some whiskey in there. That helps. And then we roast it and then put it back in there, and then it really sucks up all the rest of the aromas out of the barrel.
And it doesn't spoil over time?
Well, no, because we get most of the moisture out of it from that first original soaking. So it's pretty dry once we put it back in. And we put it in the grain kind of a little warm to put it back in a little warm. You need to put it right out of the roaster really to get it to really pick up the rest of the, because when it comes out of the roaster, the grain is only like 2% more, at least, the most like 2% moisture. So it really kind of balances out. And now if we would leave it in there for more than, a few months, then it would start getting slack and getting a little stale. But we leave it in there for about a month or two, and then pull it out, and it's just this beautiful. It's not like a bourbon barrel aged beer, so it's not like, which I enjoy because I really don't like bourbon barrel aged beers very much, because I want to drink bourbon. I'm going to drink bourbon, but it adds a nice vanilla oakiness to the beer that is very lightly perceived, and honestly, if you're not looking for it, you wouldn't even notice it. But it's just this really nice balance, or nice addition to the beer. But again, so that's another weird malt that people are like, oh, cool, you're doing that. but we're not ever going to buy that. But that's really cool that you're doing that. So, so that's, we make a lot of base malts, and that's really what we sell the most of. But I really always like to have some, options for people that are willing to step out of their comfort zone and try some really unique things.
I'm going to have more with Caleb in a moment, but first, thanks to the companies that help keep the mics hot on this show. Pairing rich notes of chocolate and coffee from roasted malts with deep tones of vanilla and oak from its time in bourbon barrels, each bottle of Dragon's Milk is a delicious adventure waiting to be opened. Find Dragon's Milk near you at dragonsmilk.com. New Zealand Hops LLC will host Brew Expo America attendees at its booth, number 1743, this week in Denver. Visit and smell fragrant hops and oils, attend brewmaster Q&As, a book signing, musical happy hours, and more. Learn more at facebook.com/New Zealand Hops. And Brees is proud to control their malt starting in the field until it arrives at your brewery. They have long-term relationships with several hundred growers in the Bighorn Basin of Wyoming and Montana, where warm days, cool nights, and floodwater irrigation yield some of the highest quality barley in the U.S. And now, back to Caleb Michalke of Sugar Creek Malt. One way that brewers, I think, are stepping out of comfort zones, or at least beer societal norms, is I'm seeing a lot more corn show up in beers. And that's what actually prompted this conversation. You and I are Facebook friends, although we've never met in person, as we established before we started recording. But I've admired your work from afar, and you've been posting for the last couple of weeks these really beautiful corn porn shots of varieties that you're growing. I don't know if that's the appropriate term to use, but
I like it. I'm going to start using that.
Good. You can send the royalty checks my way to
right.
Randy Crouch. That's fine. It's my new LLC is corn porn. But yeah, all the pretty corns, as you've been saying, which is a much more PC and gentler way of saying it.
Yeah.
But it got me thinking when I saw these pictures of, for a long time in American brewing, especially given the rise of craft beer, corn and rice, but corn was maligned, and it was, we're only going to use the purest ingredients. And if the big guys are using adjuncts like corn and rice, well, they can go to hell, and things like that. And this was a line that was bought by a lot of consumers in the craft space for a very long time. And I think a lot of brewers for a very long time. And there were people who pushed back on this. I mean, notably, years ago, who's it? Jace Marty from Shells wrote a pretty impassioned letter to the BA being like, we're about as authentic as it gets, and we're an old American family-owned brewery, and yeah, we use corn, yeah, we use rice in our beers, and there's nothing wrong with that. And then Chris Loring at Notch was making a beer, I think, called the Mule for a while, which was an American corn lager. So there's been these pushbacks of the general narrative, but corn is still used for whiskey. This is my long wind-up pitch to how is it selling corn to brewers these days? Is it still an uphill battle, or are people?
Well, let's go back to my entire business to begin with. Malt in general, I feel like got the back burner for a long time.
Sure. Well, it still does. Yeah,
it does. Yeah. And that's, that was one of the things that and the things that I've strived over the last 6 years of the business that I have is to make malt cool, make people really want to try different malts. And we've got a new lager variety coming out here this fall. And, this the exact same thing. When we talk about corn and we talk about lagers, 10 years ago, that was like, oh, lager is terrible. We're not making lagers. That's what the macro guys do. Yeah. So my entire business has always been trying to bring back, but shine light on some of these products that in beer that don't get the attention that they should. And that's kind of always been my push. And, we started smoking malts in 2016, and smoke beers are starting to become popular. And We started malting corn back in, I think the first malted corn that we did was back in 2017. We did a malted corn for Three Floyds, and they did a corn IPA. That was the first beer that ever used corn. That from our malted corn. I mean, that was the first beer that we ever sold malted corn for.
Was that Corn Lord? Is that what they did?
Yep. Yeah. Corn. Okay. Yeah. Corn Lord. Yeah. I think that was what it was called. Yeah. It was something like that. Was it a Corn Lord? Yeah, I think it was. I think it was something like that. Yeah.
Stop. I'm teasing. That's just
no.
That's
I think
awful.
It actually was. It was like.
Oh, was it really? I was just trying to make a Dark Lord joke.
Corn Lord. It was gosh, it was something like that though. It was a play off of one of their other beers. It wasn't Corn Lord. It was
Alpha Kernel,
Alpha Corn or something. I don't remember what the name of it was. But yeah, it was something like that.
Oh, I was just trying to tease them. I try to do my research as deep as I can and before I do these shows, but like I was just trying to make a joke off of that one. I had
but you're actually pretty accurate. So yeah, it was something like that.
I'm not original. Yeah.
And so I had a little extra from that. I custom malted that for them. And it was actually a collaboration between the whole Northwest Indiana Brewers group, and they did that beer. Then I had a little extra from that contract malt that I did for them, and sold it to a few other brewers. And the beer that they made with it, they just loved. And I was like, well, maybe we should start doing this a little more. So we started doing like 1 or 2 batches every year for the last few years, and really the last 2 or 3 years, it's really taken off. So I've got people putting it malted corn in lagers. I've got them putting it in cream ales. I've got them putting it in saisons. I just had a hazy IPA that was made with Oaxacan green corn this week. I have a brewer that does every year 100% malted corn grisette that he sours with lactobacillus that he swabs off of the corn itself. It's really taken off and become its own kind of unique thing that has really produced some beautiful beers. And so we originally started out with just yellow corn, and that's what we malted the first time. And
yeah, that is okay.
Yeah, and we did that for
the
first 2 years, and then I actually learned of there's another guy doing some really cool stuff with corn. It's called Dancing Star Farms out in Pennsylvania.
Okay.
I bought some Bloody Butcher from him 3 or 4 years ago, and did a batch of that, and just fell in love with the corn at that point. And so we started doing some research into some different varieties that we could grow here. And we did Bloody Butcher last year. Last fall was our first harvest of an heirloom variety corn, which was our Bloody Butcher. And it went great. We got a good yield off of it. It didn't fall down in the field, which is what we were most worried about, getting lodged in the field. And so we decided to do more this year. This year we've got Bloody Butcher Oaxacan green, which is a very old Mexican green corn. And then we also have Boone County White, which is a white corn that was actually bred in the 1870s, just about 10 miles down the road from us. That was actually a very popular corn in the 1880s, 1890s. And then it kind of fell off at that point.
All right, so here's what I need. Here's what I need because I don't know enough about corn to have like a super deep, intelligent conversation with you, which I really want to right now because I'm fascinated by this. So I'm going to ask you to put on your professor hat again because white corn, yellow corn, we put in hot water for a few minutes, or we're putting on the grill, or we're doing whatever this type of year, and it's delicious. And I think most everybody knows what that tastes like. You just named 3 different corns, and so I'm curious, when you were milling yellow corn early on, what are like 1 or 2 predominant flavors that would show up in the beer off of that yellow corn? That's the first part of this question.
Yeah. So like the yellow and the white corn that we've malted in the past, I would say are the cleanest, most corny flavored corn. So it definitely has that corn, just kind of like sweet corn flavor, but also since it's malted and toasted in the kiln, it's got this almost like corn puff, like cereal kind of flavor to it. Also, it's got this like kind of toasted corn flavor mixed in with like malted barley flavor. Okay. So it's honestly, a great malt that used to be malted. Corn used to be malted quite a bit back before the 1900s. And the extract's a little bit lower, but it makes just this gorgeous flavor in different beers. So yeah, that was the yellow and the green, or I'm sorry, the yellow and the white. The Bloody Butcher, I would say, is a little bit more.
Okay, good. So you anticipated my question, because I wanted to sort of start to talk about the flavors. And Bloody Butcher, I've had beers made with this before. Evan Watson of Plan B Farm Brewery. For those who have been listening to the podcast for a very long time now, Evan Watson has a song about Bloody Butcher that he likes to sing.
It's a great song.
Is it? No, it is.
No.
I mean, it's not going to win the Grammy, but it's it can win something. But all right, so Bloody Butcher though.
Yeah, so I get more of like a berry fruit to like it, and then like a more of a spicy character. It's like fruity, spicy kind of character in the Bloody Butcher. Is what I get from the Bloody Butcher.
What is this? What is a style of beer that you think Bloody Butcher plays best in?
I like it best in sours.
Okay.
I've had it in lagers and I've had it in sours, and personally I like it best in the just a slightly tart like farmhouse ale or it's just a nice little tart, easy drinking beer. I've had a few of those with the Bloody Butcher, and it turns out great.
Okay.
The lagers are also great. Don't get me wrong on that. I love the lagers a little bit too, but I think that little bit of tartness, the acidity. So acidity kind of brings out the color in some of these beers too, and some of these corns. So a slightly acidic beer will allow that color to kind of hang on a little bit too, a little bit better than a non-acidic beer. So yeah, it's fun to see a beer that has like a pink little hue to it. It comes across nicely. So yeah, I mean, it's not a huge. As far as flavor goes in the beers, I mean, it's not a huge difference. I don't think you're gonna, be able to really tell if you aren't doing like a side by side tasting, like a huge difference in the different varieties. But there are definitely subtle differences in them. Hawk and Green, I see more of like, I've only had a couple beers with Hawk and Green. Most of that has gone to whiskey so far. But the beers that I have had, I would say it's more closely related to the white and yellow corn. It's more of a really earthy, corny flavor to that one. It's not as bright as like Bloody Butcher and spicy as Bloody Butcher is. But it also produces like this cool kind of green color. I have a hazy IPA right now that he had it pretty cloudy, and he said it had this like kind of weird kind of grayish color to it. But so he put some biofine in it and cleared it up, and it has this really nice like dark golden, almost with a touch of green to it. It's really a cool, and it's a great little hazy IPA. So.
And then the last one that you mentioned was this Boone County White Corn.
Yeah, so this is brand new for us. We don't know. It's this is the first year we've grown it. I found some seed for it. I've heard people talk about Boone County White for years, and I never realized that it was actually from my Boone County that I live in until last year. And I started doing some research into different corns and realized it was actually bred in the town that I grew up in, basically in the late 1800s. And won the Chicago World Fair and all that kind of stuff, and was very popular corn for a couple generations. So we found some seed for that and grew that this year, and it is a very cool looking corn. It's like 15-foot stalks. I mean, just huge, tall stalks. It looks like a bamboo forest almost when you're walking through it, and you can almost not even reach the ears of the on the corn stalk because they're so tall. Like I have to almost get on my tippy toes to pull the ears off. It's just crazy how tall it is. And the ears are just giant, these huge, giant white corn ears. So yeah, it'll be fun to see what that one does malting. We're also this winter installing a stone mill. So we're going to start doing stone ground flours, corn grits. And so it'll be fun to see the different flavors that come in baking these different corns too.
That's awesome. I love corn grits. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll have to talk with you about, how to best order that. But you brought up something that was sort of interesting of there hasn't been enough trials, or if somebody's just tasting it right off the bat, they're not necessarily going to, pick up on it. Maybe aside from color. In the hops world, I think there's so much Citra, there's so much Mosaic out on the market, just to use two of the more popular hops at the moment, that even casual craft beer drinkers, people who, aren't into it or listening to this podcast, can identify or pick up, or at least like understand some of the hallmarks or tenets.
Yeah.
What needs to be done, or can malt, can corn follow the same path as hops with the repetitive nature where do you think there's a point where at some point somebody will have a beer and say, oh yeah, this says Bloody Butcher in it? Do you think we can hit that point?
So malt is, the business that I'm in is subtle. Our flavors are subtle, unless you're going for like roasted malts and things like that obviously are very intense. But base malts, even in larger quantities, different grains, if they're malted, they still have a similar flavor profile. It's just very subtle differences. And the problem is that we only use them in a very small percentage. So like if we're doing a corn beer, maybe we're only putting 20% of the grain bill is corn. So it's not like you're doing like a huge percentage of that. So they are subtle differences, but and they are differences, but unless you're trained and have actually chewed on that grain and know what that grain tastes like before it goes into a beer, I do think it's hard for people to kind of pick out those things. They just know that it tastes good and they know that it tastes different, but unless you've had that, I mean, kind of like hops too, unless you've smelled that hop and then you know exactly what that hop kind of, or you've had beers with that in the past and you know what that hop tastes like, you're not going to really be like, oh, that's a Mosaic or that's a Citra, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think, as breweries embrace malt and malted grains more and more over the, in the coming years, we've made the craft malt world, I think, has made a big difference in the brewing industry in the last 10 years that we've been doing this. Nobody really cared about malt 10 years ago, and I've seen so many breweries opening up now that are really focusing on malt forward beers and lagers and things like that 10 years ago wouldn't have sold at all in the marketplace. So I think if we keep pushing and keep trying to innovate and bring new flavors to the table, I think there is a time that, hopefully in the future that people will have had enough of those beers, have had enough of lagers with Bloody Butcher in it to say, oh, that's a Bloody Butcher lager. But it takes time, and it takes, and since it's so subtle and since it's such a small percentage in a grain bill, it is a bit harder to realize instead of hops, in the hop world.
So you talked about,
because hops are so in your face, hops are so in your face. And what we do is so not in your face. It's the base of beer. It's what makes the foundation of beer. But it's not something that, you're going to be like, whoa, that is an intense flavor. And that's not malt, not really what malt is supposed to be.
Are you not doing your job if the opposite happens?
If what opposite happens? If
I don't know. That was a really indelicate question. Yeah.
Yeah. If people are like, whoa, I can taste that flavor.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah. I think it does throw brewers for a loop sometimes if I do give them a malt that is intensely flavored, because it is, they're not used to that. They're used to having these hop bombs and used to having, sour bombs with what they're doing, and throwing all these adjuncts in. But when you give them a malt that is just like, whoa, they don't know what to do with it a lot of times. And it is kind of a growing and learning we're in growing and learning phase for both maltsters and brewers, I think, and then the consumers in the end too.
So you talked about pushing new flavors, and that's always this interesting thing. But you touched upon this briefly. But I really want to hear about Edelweiss, this malt that you have that you brought back from Europe a couple years ago, and that you're getting ready to really introduce, because the story behind it, which I hope you'll share with us now, is so fascinating and really intriguing, and like one of those things where like I want as many brewers as possible to get their hands on this, because I really want to taste what they can do with it. Especially the smart brewers, who I think can probably do some cool stuff with that. Do you have the bandwidth to talk with us about that?
Yeah. So back in 2016, my wife and I ended up going over to Europe and going to a conference, and learning and meeting a seed bank over there that has, they got banked hundreds and hundreds of different small grains. We met with them, spent a couple of days with them, and told them, all right, so we're in Indiana. We really don't know what grows here in Indiana yet, because we're just starting out, but we know that we want a winter variety. And we've learned that these German, like Southern Germany, Czech Republic, Southern French varieties kind of do better for us in our climate. So if you could send us, some samples, we'll plant them, see what they do. So that was summer of 2016. That fall, we got 2 samples in the mail. There were 200-gram samples. We planted both of them. So like a little, I don't know, snack pack, in a Ziploc bag.
I was going to say, I don't even understand like what that looks like.
Very small. So like, if you go to, let's say if you go get some seeds to plant in your garden, and it's like
in the little
pack,
envelope. Yeah.
Yeah. Basically that big, about that much, but full. It was full. I mean, it wasn't just like a few seeds. It was a full bag of that, but that was it. That was all we had. We planted these 2 varieties. One far surpassed the other. And we ended up replanting that one. We had to hand cut we went out and literally with scissors, and cut the heads off of this one row that we had, and hand threshed and hand winnowed to get the kernels off of the stalk. And we've replanted that for the last 5 years now. 5 years, 2016, 17, 18, 19, 20. Yeah. So 5 years. We're going to plant it again this fall for the sixth season. And we went from 200 grams, so a little seed packet, to we ended up harvesting about 10,000, or a little over 10,000 pounds of it this year. So quite a bit more. So during that time, I started doing some research into what this variety was. And it turns out, because I really didn't know, they just sent me some varieties that they thought might grow well for us. And we're like, all right, we'll plant them, see what happens. And the one did well. So we're like, well, let's keep planting that one. So I started doing some research on it. And it turns out it's a variety that was bred outside of Vienna, late 1800s, early 1900s. It was released in the early 1900s, but he was working on it in the late 1800s. And its 2 parents are 2 of the Hanna Moravian landrace varieties, or the Moravian Hanna landrace varieties, which are, basically the predecessor to all of our modern varieties now.
Cool.
It was what Czech Pilsner was first made with. So these are a landrace variety is basically just the grain that the farmers had. It wasn't an actual variety of barley. It was just, farmers kept their own seed, and for some reason in the Hanna region of Moravia, they had really good barley, and so breeders started going to that region and selecting different landrace varieties from these farmers and breeding them and trying to make new varieties. This is one of the first of those varieties that were made. So it's got 2 landrace varieties as parents, and it's a winter variety, a winter malting variety, which really wasn't even bred that often back then. It was all 2-row varieties. So it was really one of the only winter malting varieties that we were able to find, besides like Marisol, the original English varieties, beer and the early like Maris Otter and things like that. Those were all I'm pretty sure don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure Maris Otter is a winter variety, but
we're recording it on a podcast.
Yeah, I know. Right. Yeah. I'm pretty sure a lot of the English varieties.
I mean, I'm not quoting you. You're just saying it and it's going out over the radio now.
So, yeah. But yeah. I'm a lot of the English varieties.
I mean, we'll just say praise Maris, and if there's a problem, I'm sure I'll get hate mail from Alex Kidd, and I'll put it in the pile.
There you go. Yeah, there were a lot more. Let's just say there were a lot more winter varieties coming out of England back in the earlier days of barley breeding.
Yeah.
But
you pulled
Germany,
out of the skid. Nice
job.
Pulled
it out. But yeah, in Germany it was mostly spring varieties. So to find an old winter variety was really exciting for us. And then to have it as a Czech, as this really great pedigree of a Czech Hanna Landrace for parents was even better. And then thirdly, I figured out that the university that it was bred in the late 1800s, early 1900s, was a university that I actually studied at for 6 months. And so, yeah, it has all these kind of another connection is I'm actually 50% Czech. So my mom is 100% Czech. So it has all these, we didn't know when this barley variety came to us that I would be connected to it in so many different ways. And so it just kind of feels like it has worked out.
This feels like this goes back to the tomato that I was talking about, like that you're speaking to the grain and it's growing.
Yeah.
You're singing to it, and it's there's a connection.
Yeah. There's a real connection with this. We've got it micro malted for the last few years, from the small samples we've been able to harvest. We send it to the lab and get it micro malted. It's going to be a under modified lager malt. It really needs it really benefits from step mashing and decoctions. And if you have the brew set up and you have the expertise to make those style lagers, this is the malt that that you can do it with.
So you're going to want to be sending this to like Ashley Carter at Bierstadt or Chris Johnson down at Green Bench.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
So we only have.
Are they already in line?
So I'm not telling you who's brewing with it yet.
Okay.
I've got people in line for the first year.
Are you being selective as to who you want to get this?
Yeah, I'm trying to get it out to different regions in the country. So yeah, so that people can then spread the word. So yeah, it's going to be going to the East Coast, the Midwest, and then like the mountain. Mountain region.
I'm going to guess if there's a lager brewer on the East Coast. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So
Salem is beautiful in October.
I wish actually that is not where it's going, but I do.
Chris Loring, pay attention. So, yeah.
I know. But yeah, it's gonna. So I've only got I got about 10,000 pounds of it harvested this year, but I need to keep enough seed for next year. So I'm only going to be able to malt about 7,000 pounds of this year. So it's really, I'm limiting it to one beer per brewery. And I've had brewers reach out to me saying they want to use it, months ago. And so I've got those breweries lined up. I'm hoping next year we'll have about 50 to 75,000 pounds of it next year. So we're just kind of getting it out into the market this year, seeing how it tastes in beer, because nobody's brewed with this malt since before World War II. So it'll be fun.
And so, all right. So two questions then. The first one is 10,000 pounds. How much of that are you going to smoke?
None of it.
All right.
I'm making only Pilsner malt with it. So we are going to make Pilsner and Vienna malt with it. And I'm probably will turn the Soinhus into, I'll start using that grain in the Soinhus eventually also. But this year I want it to be.
I was really just teasing. You don't have to go all the way with that one. But
yeah, but we will this year we're only making Pilsner malt. Next year we will be making Pilsner and Vienna malt, since it's actually is an Austrian variety.
Yeah.
It was actually bred in Austria.
But in all seriousness though, as you're talking to breweries that want this, that have an interest in making beer, with this, before World War II, like that's amazing. Are you putting caveats on this? Like, you don't want this showing up in a hazy IPA, I imagine. Or
no, no. This is only going to brewers that are going to be doing step mash or decoctions and making some type of lager out of it. So yeah, not this year. Once we get enough in stock, maybe. But for the first year or two, I am definitely limiting it to what will be made with it.
Do you think that it has applications or could have applications outside of that? Outside of like the normal step mashing lagers?
I don't know. That's a good question. I really don't know. I definitely am putting it out in the market for that.
Yeah.
Could it be good since it is a little bit under modified? Could it be good for hazy IPAs also? Possibly. Because it is going to have, use chip malt in hazy IPAs to, get body and things like that. So it is going to have more body and a little bit more mouthfeel to the grain. Could it be used in that eventually? Yeah, probably. But I'm definitely marketing it as an old world lager malt primarily.
I love it. You mentioned at the beginning, and I'm mindful of your time now, but you mentioned at the beginning of other farms in your area diversifying and going into agritourism or trying other things to, remind people of the importance of farming or just even to keep the lights on. You're talking about an Airbnb or, at least accommodations and lodging on your property, as well as putting in your own brewery at this point. That seems to be the natural evolution of farms your size right now. Is that something you're looking forward to doing? Or is that something that, is sort of necessary to keep making pre-World War II malts? Or both?
I think both. I think both. Whether I'm looking forward to it or not, that's another question.
Yeah. Because I mean, if you're a farmer, do you want to be an innkeeper? If you're a farmer, do you also want to be a bartender in a tap room? Yeah.
Right. Yeah, we live on the property where the malt house is. The malt house is about 100 foot walk from my back step, and that's where everything would go. So my wife and I have really talked a lot in the last few years. How are we going to make this so that we can still have our own, private time and have our own family life and be able to do this. But it has kind of grown out of necessity. As you said, if we want to really produce these malts and really want to see the beers made the way that we want them to be made, why are we not making those? I've produced these malts and I can envision the beer that it should go into. And I think it'd be really neat to be able to do all of that here on one spot. And we also have a lot of brewers come out and we do little farm collabs here. We make little farmhouse beers here. So brewers will come out, they'll spend a day or two on the farm. We'll make something, with doing a Stein beer or, we have a 50-gallon copper kettle that we make beer in, and mash in a wooden barrel and, all these kinds of really old, farmhousey techniques. And then the brewers take that home. So just like 2 weeks ago, a brewery called Orkanoy out of Chicago. They do a lot of Scandinavian inspired beers and a lot of lagers also. They came down and we made a West Coast style gruit. So we went through the herb garden.
Wait a minute, flag on the play.
Yeah, right. So we went through our herb garden here on the farm and picked out, as many piney, dank, citrusy kind of herbs that we could. And then made a non-hopped IPA. So we'll see how it turns out. It's fermenting right now. That we used how do you pronounce it? The Simonitis, the Lithuanian yeast that it actually produces really good fruity flavors. So that kind of balanced out the pininess that we put in with the herbs. So yeah, it's a fun time for brewers to come down and just like experiment, on a very small scale and just have fun and just, be able to go out through the farm and through the malt house and pick out whatever ingredients they want of the malt house and then go through the farm and do that. So we wanted to kind of build off of that and have a place for them to stay while they're here, and then also have a brewery to have the tasting room for these beers that we're making here on the farm. So that's where that came from. So that's kind of how it evolved. And yeah, we're working on doing a large cellar and doing all doing a lot of wood fermented lagers and in a big large cellar underneath the brewery. I've been actually locating a lot of wild hops in the last year around our county.
I saw you put a Facebook post up. I don't want to blow up your spot, but like you found wild hops recently that you were posting online.
Whether they're wild or feral, I don't know. I need to get some genetic analysis done on them, but I have found 4 different clusters of hops now on 4 different creeks within a 10-mile radius of our farm. So, and they're not.
And these aren't ones that you tried to just, plant and
No.
see if they took.
No. I mean, they are in the middle of fields, middle of woods, or not. Whether they were planted 100 years ago. I know the people that own these properties, and they've been there since the 50s and 60s, and they know that they'd never planted anything there in that time. So whether at the turn of the century somebody planted something close nearby it and it somehow migrated towards the creeks, and seeds kind of migrated toward. Anyways, there are these. So we're trying to make this very unique experience for everything, literally everything, from the hops to the malt to the herbs to the fruit is grown, right here. And then just have a very small farmhousey style, copper kettle, wooden barrels, all that kind of stuff set up that we're making really traditional farmhouse ales and lagers both.
Do you intend to be the brewer?
No. I intend to help come up with ideas for the beer, but I'm not experienced enough to be the brewer. No.
So I've been asked, yeah.
That's So I've got a guy that's working for me now that has worked for me for the last 2 years. That before coming to the Malt House, he was a head brewer at a couple of different breweries. So he and I have been talking a lot about this project, and it's something that. I don't know if it's going to happen in the next year, but it's definitely we keep building towards it. I've torn down a couple different barns now that we've got old. I'm trying to keep it as much as authentic to a farmhouse as possible. So we're going to rebuild a few barns out of old wooden beams that we've torn down out of other barns that have fallen in, and have this really authentic farmhouse feel.
I can't wait to visit. No, I mean it. Like, I miss Indiana. Sometimes, not all the time.
Sometimes, and certain months out of the year are good. The rest of the months are
like every once in a while, I get a really great craving for a pork tenderloin sandwich, like a really good one. And Indiana is probably the best for it. And some of the other places that I used to hang out in Indianapolis. I've been asking folks for the last couple of weeks on the show, in our darkest timeline that we're in right now. I've been looking for a little bit of levity, a little bit of light. And so my wife and I have been watching The Good Place again on Netflix. Yeah. And towards the end, there's this whole thing where you can walk through a green door and be anywhere you want at any point in time with whoever you want. And I thought that was sort of a neat thing. So if you could walk through the green door right now as the show ends, and be at a bar anywhere having a beer with anybody. It doesn't have to be a celebrity or fantasy or whatever, although it can be. Where would you want to be? What would you want to drink? And who would you want to be with? Oh, man.
That is a deep question.
Isn't it? This is about the afterlife, man. Like this is aspirational for better days ahead.
I know. So I don't have a specific bar to choose, but my heart really lies in the North Woods of Wisconsin. The Czech side of my family had a cabin there for 100 years, and I spent a lot of my summers up there on the lakes. So if I could be lakeside in northern Wisconsin, I'd be happy as a peach there. As far as what I'm drinking, I don't think you can ever really go wrong with a well-made Vienna lager. I like lagers, and I like a little bit of malt character in the lager. So a good Vienna lager would make me pretty happy. And who am I drinking it with? Man, that is a tough question. I think it'd be kind of neat to talk to Harry Harlan. My son's name is Arlen. He's named after Harry Harlan, who was one of the original barley breeders in North America. He traveled around the world. They called him the Indiana Jones of barley. And he traveled around the world looking for new varieties of barley across the world and brought them back to the United States, the USDA, and planted them here. So I think it'd be kind of cool to kind of talk to him about his life. So
that's awesome. Well, I know it's harvest season, so the fact that you could spare an hour to talk with me right now, I really appreciate it, because this is so insightful, and I'm excited to see what beers are made with your malt going forward, and certainly to see more corn beers going out there. But man, thanks for doing this today. I really appreciate it.
No, thanks for reaching out and want to do it. It's been a great time talking to you and not catching up, because we really never knew each other before, but it's been fun.
Next time we'll catch up.
Yeah.
Are you drinking corn lagers? Tell me the ones you like best. We're on social media at The Beer Edge, and you can always reach me on email at John Hall, it's JOHNHOLL at beeredge.com, or on Twitter at John_Hall. And if you love smoked beers, and of course you do, just like Caleb, a reminder to check out the This Week in Rauchbier group on Facebook, or on Twitter and Instagram at TW Rauchbier. And if you're interested in advertising, please reach out to Liz Melby. She's at liz@beeredge.com, and she'll let you know all of the information. And speaking of that, this episode was made possible by the support of Brees. Brees has been malting barley for 145 years, and the 5th generation of family ownership is currently leading the company. But the values have always remained the same, producing the highest quality, most consistent malt, and working directly with their customers to help them succeed. From pilsners to porters and everything in between, Brees offers the finest handcrafted malts, extracts, and adjuncts to help you brew the perfect beer. 20 years ago, New Holland Brewing Company embarked on a journey into the unknown, brewing the first batch of Dragon's Milk bourbon barrel-aged stout. What started as a single barrel in the back of the brewery has transformed into the best-selling American-made stout today, pairing rich notes of chocolate and coffee from roasted malts with deep tones of vanilla and oak from its time in bourbon barrels. Each bottle of Dragon's Milk is a delicious adventure waiting to be opened. Find Dragon's Milk near you at dragonsmilk.com. And if you're headed to Denver for the Craft Brewers Conference this week, be sure to pick up breakfast and a sample of juicy Nectaron or Riwaka hops at the New Zealand Hops booth, number 1743. Stop by to watch the North American New Zealand Hops LLC team demo their first of its kind fractionated hop oils and smell the tropical fruit notes on full display. There will also be live brewmaster Q&As, a book signing, musical happy hours, and giveaways. Learn more at facebook.com/New Zealand Hops. And one last reminder to go to beeredge.com to see all that we have going on. And also check out the Beer Edge podcast. Steal This Beer has new episodes every Monday, and the BYO Nano podcast has new episodes releasing on the 15th of every month. As for this show, Nate Schweber does the music, Jeff Quinn designed the logo, and I'm John Hall. New episodes release every Wednesday, and that's when I'm going to be back again to drink beer and to think beer.